The year is 1348. Europe is not just dying, it is being erased.
How dare
Imagine
you
a horror
defile
so
this place with
absolute
your
that
presence?
mothers
Get
refuse
out
to
of my
touch their
sight
own children.
before I cast you
Imagine
into the
a
void.
silence so profound that in great cities like Florence and Paris, the only sound is the digging of graves. They called it the Great Mortality. Later, history would brand it the Black Death. In less than 5 years, it wiped out nearly 200 million people. It killed half of the population of the known world. It was the closest humanity has ever come to extinction. Open any history textbook, and it will tell you the same story. It was the rats. It was the fleas. It was a bacterium called Yersinia pestis that traveled on trade ships from the east, thrived in the filth of medieval sanitation, and decimated a population that didn't understand hygiene. But what if the history books are wrong? What if the rats were just the messengers, but not the message? What if the filth wasn't just physical dirt, but energetic pollution? Historians ask how it spread, but they rarely ask why it stopped, or why, in the midst of the apocalypse, certain individuals walked into plague pits, carried the dying in their arms, and never got sick. Why did the bacteria consume one house and skip the next? We have assumed for centuries that the Black Death was a biological accident. But tonight, we are going to explore a terrifying possibility. The Black Death was not an accident. It was a frequency trap. Dr. Elias Thorne is a man who deals in old paper and forgotten secrets. As a paleopathologist and historian working on the island of Poveglia, infamous plague island of Venezuela, has spent 20 years digging up the bones of the 14th century. He has held the skulls of plague victims. He has analyzed the DNA of the ancient bacteria. He is a man of science. He believes in data. But 6 months ago, during an excavation of a mass grave that had been sealed since 1350, Elias found something that science couldn't explain. Buried beneath a layer of lime and skeletons was a singular, metallic object. It wasn't iron, it wasn't bronze. It was a smooth, obsidian-like disc that vibrated with a faint heat. When Elias touched it, he didn't get a reading of carbon dating. He got a download. That night, in his temporary lab on the haunted island, Elias wasn't visited by a ghost. He was visited by an observer. The entity, who called himself Xylos, appeared not as a terrifying monster, but as a being of shimmering, refracted light. Xylos claimed to be part of a galactic order that monitors developing civilizations during their great filters the moments where a species either evolves or goes extinct. You are digging in the wrong place. Dr. Xylos told him, you are looking for a bug, but you should be looking for a signal. The event you call the Black Death, the observer revealed, was not merely a biological plague. It was a cosmic frequency purge. Your planet entered a region of space saturated with dense, chaotic energy. The human collective consciousness, trapped in fear, superstition, and violence, created a resonance field. You became a magnet. The bacteria did not attack you at random, Xylos explained. The bacteria was simply the physical manifestation of your own spiritual dissonance. It was eating the energy of your fear. The rats were not the problem, Elias. The problem was that humanity had vibrated itself into a corner called hell. This revelation changes everything. It suggests that the 75 million people who died didn't just die of bubonic plague. They died because they were caught in a frequency trap, a feedback loop of terror that lowered their immune systems to the point of collapse. In this video, we are going to decode the message that Xylos gave to Dr. Thorne. We are going to look at the 14th century not as a history lesson, but as a warning for the present. We will uncover the true nature of the fallen entities that fed on the suffering of Europe. We will reveal the secret of the saints who survived by hacking the frequency code. And we will ask the uncomfortable question, are we, right now, walking into the same trap? If you are ready to look beyond the microscope and understand the physics of the soul, if you want to know how to quarantine your spirit from the chaos of the modern world, then subscribe. The history class is over. The declassification begins. To understand why the trap snapped shut in 1347, we must first look at the bait. The history books tell you that the plague arrived suddenly, like a bolt of lightning from a clear sky. This is a lie. The sky over Europe had been dark for decades. Before the first flea bit the first peasant, Europe was already a graveyard of hope. Dr. Elias Thorne sat in his office on Poveglia, listening to the digital recording of Xylos. The alien's voice was analyzing the historical data, not looking at bacteria counts, but at the emotional resonance chart of the 14th century. Your species prepares the soil long before the weed grows, Xylos explained. Look at the years leading up to the event. You created a perfect vacuum of despair. In 1315, a generation before the plague, the weather turned against humanity. The Little Ice Age began. It rained for months. Crops rotted in the fields. The Great Famine swept across the continent. Parents ate their own children to survive. For 30 years, the collective consciousness of Europe vibrated at the frequency of starvation and scarcity. Then came the 100 Years' War. England and France locked in a brutal, pointless conflict that drained the treasuries and soaked the fields in blood. The vibration shifted from starvation to violence, and overseeing it all was the medieval church, a colossal machine of spiritual terror. The average peasant in 1340 didn't live in the love of Christ. They lived in the fear of hell. They were taught that they were born filthy, that God was a tyrant with a magnifying glass, and that demons were waiting under every bed. The vibration settled into its lowest, most dangerous state, guilt. You built a pressure cooker. Xylos told Elias, you compressed millions of minds into a state of absolute terror, hunger, and self-loathing. You created a massive, dark energy field over the continent. To the cosmic ecosystem, this field looked like a beacon. It looked like ... food. Then, the spark lit the fuse. October 1347, Messina, Sicily. 12 Genoese galleys pulled into the harbour. The dockworkers who went aboard found a scene from a nightmare. Most of the sailors were dead. Those still alive were delirious, their bodies covered in black, oozing boils that dripped blood and pus. They called it la pestilenza. The infection didn't behave like a normal disease. It moved faster than a horse. A person could go to sleep healthy and be dead by morning. The symptoms were horrific. Swellings the size of apples in the groin and armpits, vomiting blood, and finally, the skin turning black as gangrene set in. The body literally began to rot while the person was still alive. But the true horror wasn't the biology. It was the psychology. Watch the reaction, Xylos instructed, projecting a holographic map of the panic spreading north. This is where the trap activates. The bacteria is just the seed. The panic is the fertilizer. As the death toll rose, society collapsed. The bond between human beings, the energetic connection of empathy. Giovanni Boccaccio, a witness in Florence, wrote, "Fathers and mothers refused to nurse and assist their own children as though they did not belong to them. People walled themselves up in their houses. They abandoned the sick in the streets. Priests refused to hear confessions. Doctors refused to visit patients. The frequency of isolation became absolute. Every man was an island of terror, vibrating with the singular thought, "Do not let it touch me." And in this state of hyperfear, the immune system of the collective collapsed. Fear is a frequency that constricts, Xylos explained. It constricts the blood vessels. It constricts the breath. But most importantly, it constricts the bio. When you are terrified, your energy field shrinks. You lose your shield. You become porous. The bacteria, Yersinia pestis, is an opportunistic organism. It thrives in oxygen, high acidity environments, exactly the internal biological state of a terrified human. But humanity, in its ignorance, tried to fight back, and in doing so, they made the trap stronger. Enter the flagellants. Bands of hooded men and women marched from town to town, whipping themselves with leather thongs studded with iron spikes. They marched in rhythm, bleeding into the dirt, singing hymns, begging God to stop the plague. They believed the disease was a punishment for sin, and that only pain could pay the debt. To the medieval mind, this was an act of extreme piety. To the observer Xylos, this was an act of energetic suicide. "Look at them," Xylos said, his voice tinged with a cold sadness. "They are trying to wash away blood with more blood. They are amplifying the very frequency that attracted the plague." The flagellants acted as repeaters, the alien revealed. They marched into a town that was merely scared, and they brought a theatre of torture and guilt. They whipped the population into a frenzy of hysteria. Wherever they went, the plague followed. Not just because they carried the fleas, but because they carried the resonance. They lowered the vibration of every village they entered, turning it into a feast for the darkness. And when the whipping didn't work, when God didn't answer, the energy turned outward. It turned into rage. If God wasn't listening, it must be because of a saboteur. The collective shadow needed a target, and they found it in the Jews, in Toulon, in Strasbourg, in Basel. The mob turned on their Jewish neighbors. They accused them of poisoning the wells. It was a ludicrous accusation. You were dying of the plague just like Christians, but fear doesn't need logic. It needs a scapegoat. They rounded up thousands of innocent people and burned them alive. They murdered them in their homes. They wiped out entire communities. This was the bottom of the pit, Xylos said. The vibration of mass murder mixed with the vibration of plague. You created a vortex of such dark density that it nearly tore the fabric of your local reality. This is the frequency trap, Elias. You think the Black Death killed you. No, the Black Death was just the door. You walked through it when you chose fear over love. You walked through it when you chose blame over compassion. The bacteria simply cleaned up the mess you made. Elias sat in the dark archive, staring at the holographic map. The black ink of the plague spread across Europe like a stain. But for the first time, he didn't see it as a disease spreading. He saw it as a shadow growing. The society of the 14th century was a perfect machine designed to generate suffering. It was a closed loop. The more they died, the more they feared. The more they feared, the faster they died. So how did it stop? Elias whispered to the empty room. If the loop was perfect, how did anyone survive? Because Xylos replied, there were glitches in the machine. There were rebels. There were individuals who refused to vibrate at the frequency of the mob. And they are the key to your survival now. Dr. Elias Thorne stared at the obsidian disc on his desk. It was projecting a three-dimensional model of a Yersinia pestis bacterium. To modern science, this organism is a well-understood killer. It blocks the gut of a flea, causing the flea to regurgitate infected blood into a human host. It travels to the lymph nodes, replicates, and destroys the immune system. It is a biological machine, simple, efficient, deadly. But Xylos, the observer, rotated the hologram, revealing a layer of data that no microscope on Earth could capture. You look at the hardware, Xylos projected into Ilias's mind, and you miss the software. You assume this bacterium is an apex predator hunting you. It is not. It is a scavenger. In the ecosystem of the galaxy, there are organisms designed to break down dead matter. You have vultures. You have maggots. They are necessary. They return dead energy to the soil, but Yersinia pestis is a special kind of scavenger. It does not just eat dead flesh. It eats dead energy. Look closer, Doctor. The hologram zoomed in on the bacterium. Around its physical shell was a pulsating, dark aura. It vibrated at a specific frequency, a low, discordant hum that made Ilias's teeth ache just looking at it. This organism is designed to resonate with the frequency of entropy, Xylos explained. It is attracted to biological systems that have signaled they are ready to decompose. In a healthy, vibrant human being, one who is pulsating with the frequency of love, purpose, and vitality, this bacterium cannot latch on. It slides off. The energetic disparity is too great. The high vibration of the host literally incinerates the low vibration of the invader. But in 1348, Xylos continued, Europe was not vibrant. It was screaming the signal of decay. The famine, the war, and the religious terror had lowered the collective vibration of the population to a state of near-death. Your people were walking corpses long before the infection arrived. Their energy fields were shattered. Their auras were grey. They were broadcasting a chemical and energetic signal that said, "Decompose me." The plague did not attack Europe, Elias. It answered the call. It came to clean up the mess. It saw a continent of dying energy and did what it was programmed to do. Recycled the waste. This perspective was horrifying to Elias. It implied that the victims were somehow complicit in their own demise. Are you saying they wanted to die? Elias asked, his voice trembling with indignation. The children, the mothers, they didn't choose this, consciously. No, Xylos clarified, subconsciously, collectively. Yes, you underestimate the power of consensus reality. When a civilization spends centuries telling itself that it is sinful, worthless, and deserving of punishment, the biology eventually agrees. The cells stop fighting. The immune system, which is powered by the will to live, receives the command to stand down. But, the observer added, the light in the hologram shifting to a menacing shade of violet. The bacteria were only the physical cleaners. They were the janitors. The true architects of the horror were not microscopic. They were interdimensional. The hologram changed. The single bacterium vanished, replaced by a view of a medieval city, perhaps Florence or London seen from above. But it wasn't a normal view. The sky over the city was filled with swirling, smoky shapes. They looked like massive, translucent jellyfish or storm clouds made of oil, hovering over the rooftops, dropping tendrils down into the houses of the dying. Meet the feeders, Xylos introduced them. Or, as your ancestors called them, demons. Archons the fallen. These are not biological entities. They are energetic parasites. They exist in the frequency band just outside your visible spectrum. They do not eat bread or meat. They eat louche, the energy generated by intense emotional output, and their favorite flavor, Xylos said with clinical detachment, is fear. Human beings are powerful generators. When you are in a state of joy, you radiate light that feeds the planet. But when you are in a state of terror, agony, and despair, you release a dense, heavy energy. To these entities, a city in the grip of a plague is not a tragedy. It is a banquet. This is why the Black Death lasted so long, Elias. It was engineered to maximize the harvest. Think about the symptoms, Xylos urged. The blackening skin, the smell. It was designed to be as terrifying as possible. A quick death would have been merciful, but it would have generated very little energy. A slow, grotesque, terrifying death. That generates a massive amount of louche, the panic of the family watching, the terror of the victim, the hopelessness of the priest. All of it was food. These entities did not create the bacteria, the alien clarified, but they herded it. They manipulated the atmosphere. They whispered in the ears of the fanatics. When the flagellants marched, these entities were marching with them, drinking the pain. When the mobs burned the Jews, these entities were in the flames, gorging on the rage. The Black Death was not named for the color of the skin, Xylos revealed. It was named by the few seers who could actually see. They looked at Europe and saw a black cloud of parasitic entities suffocating the light of the continent. They saw the feeding frenzy. Elias felt a wave of nausea. The idea that human suffering was a crop to be harvested by invisible parasites was a nightmare beyond anything in Dante's Inferno. So we were cattle, Elias whispered. Just cattle for the slaughter. You were cattle because you acted like cattle, Xylos corrected firmly. You herded yourselves into the pen of fear. You gave away your sovereignty to the church, to the king, to the panic. A predator can only eat prey that runs, a prey that stands its ground, a prey that shines, is inedible. And that brings us to the mechanism of infection. The question you asked earlier, why did some live? Xylos zoomed the hologram back down to the street level. It showed two people walking through a plague-infested ward. One was a wealthy merchant, terrified, holding a scented handkerchief to his face, shrinking away from the bodies. His aura was jagged, grey, and contracting. The other was a young woman, a nun perhaps, or just a brave soul. She was washing the face of a dying man. She was tired, yes, but she was not afraid. Her focus was entirely on easing the suffering of another. Her aura was different. It was gold. It was expanding. It formed a bubble around her. Watch, Xylos commanded. The hologram showed the plague energy represented by black motes swarming around both of them. When the black motes touched the merchant's grey aura, they were absorbed instantly. They found a frequency match, resonance. The infection took hold before he even took a breath. But when the black motes touched the woman's golden aura, they sizzled. They bounced off. They disintegrated. The frequency mismatch, Xylos declared. This is the secret of immunity. It is not just about antibodies, Elias. It is about vibration. The plague vibrates at the frequency of fear approx. 0.22 Hz. Compassion vibrates at a much higher frequency approx. 150 Hz or higher. In the physics of waves, a high-frequency wave dominates a low-frequency wave. The woman did not get sick because she was not in the same reality as the bacteria. Physically, she was in the room. Energetically, she was on a different planet. She was unreachable. But the merchant, he was already dead. His fear had opened the door, laid out the welcome mat, and invited the scavenger in. Now, let us discuss the greatest weapon used against you, Xylos projected. The weapon was not the rat. The weapon was the sermon. Your historians struggle to understand why the plague was so virulent. Why did it kill the pious and the wicked alike? Why did prayer fail? The answer lies in the frequency of sin. In the language of the cosmos, sin is not a moral judgment. We do not judge you for your mistakes. To us, sin is simply static interference. It is a distortion in your broadcast signal. When you feel guilt, shame, or self-loathing, you disrupt the coherence of your own biofield. You create holes in your armor. The hologram showed a human energy field again. This time, it represented a devout medieval peasant. He was kneeling, praying, but his field was not bright. It was collapsing inward, heavy with dark, sludgy energy around the heart and gut. The Church of the 14th century taught a doctrine of absolute guilt, Xylos explained. They told the people that the plague was a punishment from God. Think about the mechanics of that statement. It planted a command in the mind of every believer. I deserve this. This is the nocebo effect weaponized on a continental scale. When a human being believes they deserve to be punished, the alien continued, their subconscious mind unlocks the back door. It lowers the defenses. It says to the invading organism, come in. You are the justice I have been waiting for. The bacteria did not have to break in. Elias, the victims invited them in because they believed the disease was the will of God. Guilt, Xylos stated with emphasis, is the heavy metal of emotions. It is dense. It is toxic. And unfortunately for your ancestors, it is the exact nutritional requirement of Yersinia pestis. The bacteria feeds on the chemical byproducts of shame, the specific cortisol and stress hormone cocktails produced by a mind that hates itself. So, you had a tragic feedback loop. The disease appeared. The priests shouted, you are sinners. Repent, scourge yourselves. The people felt more guilt. Their immune systems crashed further. The disease spread faster. The priests shouted louder. The loop tightened. It was a perfect storm of vulnerability. The feeders, those interdimensional parasites, gorged themselves on this guilt. They didn't just eat the fear of death. They ate the delicious, heavy energy of a soul that believes it is damned. This, Xylos concluded, the hologram fading into darkness, is why the Black Death was a trap. It wasn't just biology run amok. It was a psycho-spiritual harvest facilitated by a theology of self-hatred. You cannot heal a population that believes its sickness is righteous. Elias looked at the empty space where the hologram had been. He thought about the millions of people who died clutching rosaries, begging for forgiveness, never realizing that the very act of begging was what killed them. They died of a broken heart as much as a broken body. But some broke the loop, Elias said, remembering the nun in the previous vision. How? How do you stop feeling guilty when the whole world tells you you're trash? You rebel, Xylos said, a glimmer of light returning to the room. You commit the ultimate heresy. You realize you are innocent. And that brings us to the mechanism of the cure. Dr. Ilias Thorne stood over the large oak table in the archive room, spreading out a crumbling parchment map of the Venetian Republic. His finger traced the route from the open Adriatic Sea, through the narrow Lido Inlet, and resting on a small isolated island, Lazaretto Vecchio. We call it the birth of public health, Elias murmured, more to himself than to the entity watching him. The Great Council of Venice passed the law in 1377. Any ship coming from a plague port had to anchor here. They had to wait, not 10 days, not 20, but 40. Quaranta, that's where the word comes from, quarantine. He looked up at the obsidian disk. It was brilliant. They realized the disease had an incubation period. They used time as a filter. It was brilliant, Xylos the observer interrupted, his voice resonating with a harmonic frequency that seemed to vibrate the dust motes in the air. But your explanation is incomplete. You are projecting modern germ theory backward onto a civilization that did not know bacteria existed. They did not choose the number 40 because of a biological calculation, Dr. The incubation period of Yersinia pestis is rapid 2 to 7 days. If a sailor is healthy after week 1, he is likely safe. Keeping him there for another month makes no medical sense. So why 40? Xylos pressed, the hologram magnifying the island on the map. Why did the Doge of Venice insist on this specific duration? Why not 30 days, like the cycle of the moon? Why not 7, like the days of creation? Because they were not trying to kill a bug. They were trying to break a curse. They were practicing energetic alchemy. The alien projected a stream of data, cascading waterfall of religious and esoteric symbols from Earth's history, all centering on the number 40. Look at your own myths. Elias, the rains of Noah's flood fell for 40 days to cleanse the earth of wickedness. Moses spent 40 days on Mount Sinai to receive the new law. Jesus fasted for 40 days in the desert to overcome the temptations of the devil. The Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree for 49 days, 7 by 7, a resonant harmonic of this cycle. In the galactic knowledge base, Xylos explained, the number 40 represents the period of transmutation. It is the precise amount of time required for a biological consciousness to completely rewrite its baseline frequency. It is the time needed to break a neural addiction. It is the time needed for the cellular memory to purge a parasite. The Venetians were intuitive magicians. They understood that the sailors coming from the east were not just carrying fleas. They were carrying the vibration of the plague. They were saturated with the energy of death, fear, and the chaos of the ports they had fled. If you let those sailors walk directly into Venice, even if they had no symptoms, they would act as Trojan horses of energetic resonance. They would bring the panic frequency into the city. The quarantine was not a waiting room, Xylos declared. It was a decompression chamber. The hologram shifted to show a 3D simulation of a sailor on a ship anchored in the lagoon. The simulation showed his energy field aura. At the beginning of the quarantine, the field was jagged, dark grey, and swarming with the black motes of the feeders, the parasitic entities drawn to his fear. Watch what happens when you remove the stimulus, Xylos narrated. In the city, this sailor is bombarded by noise, the church bells ringing for funerals, the screams of the dying, the rumors in the tavern. His amygdala is locked in a fight or flight loop. He is broadcasting a constant signal of terror, which feeds the entities and suppresses his immune system. But on the island, there is silence. The simulation showed the days ticking by. Day 1, Day 5, Day 10. He is cut off from the collective mind. He cannot hear the panic. All he hears is the lap of the water and the wind. The ocean is a massive generator of negative ions, which scrub the energy field. The sun provides vitamin D, but also high-frequency photonic energy. By day 20, Xylos pointed out, look at the entities. The black motes around the sailor were thinning out. They were detaching. Parasites act on the principle of efficiency, the observer explained. They need a high-yield food source. A terrified man in a crowd is a banquet. A calm man alone on a ship is a famine. Without the constant reinforcement of collective fear, the sailor's anxiety begins to settle. He gets bored. Boredom is healthy. Boredom means safety. As his vibration rises from terror to neutrality, the entities lose their grip. They starve. They leave to find an easier meal. By day 40, the simulation reached the end. The sailor's aura was no longer grey. It was a soft, steady blue. He was not enlightened, perhaps, but he was clean. He was no longer a match for the frequency of the Black Death, Xylos concluded. Even if a flea bit him now, his immune system, no longer suppressed by cortisol, would likely crush the bacteria before it could replicate. The quarantine worked because it turned a victim back into a sovereign individual. Elias stared at the map. He realized the profound wisdom of the ancients. They knew that you couldn't just wash the body. You had to scrub the soul. We forgot this, Elias whispered. In 2020, we locked people in their apartments, but we left them connected to the internet. We left them connected to the fear. Precisely, Xylos said, his eyes narrowing. You practiced physical isolation but allowed digital infection. You trapped people in small boxes and pumped the sewage of bad news into their minds 24 hours a day. You denied them the alchemical reset. You kept the entities well fed. True quarantine, the alien advised, requires disconnecting from the source of the fear, not just the carrier of the germ. To heal the modern plague, you do not need 40 days on a ship. You need 40 days of silence, 40 days without the news, 40 days of nature. But isolation was only the passive cure, Xylos added, shifting the scene. There were those who could not wait 40 days. There were those who were already dying. For them, the cure had to be active. It required a transfer of energy from a higher source. And this brings us to the mystery of the saint and the beast. While the Venetians used isolation to simply pause the infection, Xylos continued, the hologram shifting to a scene deep in the Italian woodlands near Pisa. One man discovered a more active, aggressive form of immunity. Your history calls him Saint Roch San Rocco. We call him Patient Zero of the frequency cure. The hologram displayed the iconic image of Saint Roch, a nobleman who had given away his wealth to serve the plague victims. Now, he himself is infected. He has been cast out by the very city he tried to save. He is huddled under a great tree, his body feverish, lifting his tunic to reveal a blackened, oozing plague boil on his inner thigh. He is waiting for death, but looking up at him, with a loaf of bread in its mouth, is a hunting dog. The church tells you the miracle is the bread, Xylos said dismissively. They think God sent a dog to act as a delivery boy because Amazon did not exist. This is a primitive interpretation. The bread kept his caloric intake above zero, yes, but bread cannot cure the Black Death. What saved his life was not the carbohydrate. It was the signal the dog was broadcasting. To understand the cure, Elias, you must understand the energetic difference between a human and a canine, the observer explained, projecting a comparative biofield chart in the air. Look at the human field in 1348. Xylos pointed to a jagged erratic waveform that looked like a seismograph during an earthquake. It is a chaotic storm. It is polluted by complex, abstract emotions, guilt, future anxiety, fear of hell, judgment of neighbors. The human mind is constantly time-traveling, regretting the past, fearing the future. This splits the energy field. It creates static interference in the immune signaling. Now, look at the dog. The hologram showed a smooth, robust, rhythmic wave that pulsed with a steady beat. Like a drum, a dog possesses a unique neurological structure, Xylos revealed. It has no egoic prefrontal loop. It has no concept of sin. It does not worry about whether it is good enough for God. It does not fear tomorrow. It does not judge itself for yesterday. A dog exists in a state of continuous present awareness. Its brainwaves act primarily in the theta and alpha ranges. These are the exact frequencies that your monks spend decades trying to achieve through deep meditation. A dog is essentially a Zen master in a fur coat. It vibrates constantly at the frequency of life is good. It is an anchor of positivity in a sea of despair. The hologram zoomed in on the interaction between the saint and the beast. It showed the dog licking the open, infectious sores on Roch's leg. To a medieval doctor, this was insanity mixing saliva with necrotic flesh. To a modern germ theory scientist, it is dangerous. But to a quantum biologist, it was a transfer of data. You call it affection. We call it entrainment, Xylos stated. Entrainment is a fundamental law of physics. It was discovered by your scientist Christian Huygens with pendulum clocks. When a chaotic rhythm Roch's dying body comes into close contact with a strong, steady rhythm, the dog's life force, the chaotic rhythm will eventually synchronize with the steady one. The stronger magnet aligns the weaker magnet. The dog was vibrating at the frequency of unconditional life. It looked at the rotting flesh and did not see disgust. It did not see plague. It did not see punishment from God. It saw its friend. It offered absolute, unwavering acceptance. Imagine the shock to Roch's system, the alien whispered. For weeks, everyone who looked at him saw a monster. They screamed. They ran. They reflected his own belief that he was cursed. But this creature looked at him with adoration. This transmission of frequency shattered the program of I am a sinner running in Roch's mind. You cannot hold on to self-hatred when a being of pure light is looking at you with love. The dog's tongue on the wound was a biological message. You are accepted. You are clean. You are worthy. Roch survived, the alien concluded, because he plugged his dying battery into the generator of the dog. He borrowed the animal's immunity. He allowed the dog to anchor him back into the physical world, not through fear, but through oxytocin and connection. And let us re-examine the bread, Xylos added, analyzing the chemical composition of the scene. There is a subtle magic there, too. It is about the direction of energy. In the city, Roch had to beg. Begging is an energy of lack. It affirms that you are powerless. It lowers the frequency. But in the forest, the bread was a gift. He did not ask for it. It was brought to him unbidden. This shifted his vibration from scarcity to grace. He learned to receive. He learned that the universe through the dog wanted him to live. This belief, I am supported, is the most powerful immune booster in existence. It switches the nervous system from sympathetic fight, flight, to parasympathetic, rest, digest, repair. Saint Roch proved that in a world gone mad with intellectual terror, the only sanity left is found in the eyes of a beast that knows only love. He discovered the antidote to the plague, Elias realized, staring at the map. The plague is a disease of separation, man separated from God, man separated from neighbor. The cure is reconnection. Precisely, Xylos nodded. Roch reconnected with nature, the forest, and with compassion, the dog. That trinity, man, nature, lovers an impenetrable shield against the darkness. It raises the vibration above the threshold where Yersinia pestis can operate. The bacteria simply cannot survive in a host that is flooded with oxytocin. But, the alien warned, the hologram turning a dark shade of red, not everyone had a dog, and not everyone could run to the woods to escape the collective fear. What about those who were trapped in the cities? What about the doctors who tried to fight the disease with science? This leads us to the rebel physicians and, specifically, to a man you know as a prophet, but who was actually a master of frequency medicine. Saint Roch was a mystic, Xylos continued, the hologram changing to show a bustling street in Provence, France, in the 1500s. But not everyone could rely on miracles. Most people relied on doctors, and in the 14th and 16th centuries, going to a doctor was often more dangerous than the disease itself. Why? Because the medical establishment was trapped in a low-frequency paradigm. The hologram displayed the terrifying image of a plague doctor, the long, waxed leather coat, the wide-brimmed hat, and the iconic beak mask filled with herbs. Look at this image, Xylos commanded. It is the embodiment of terror. The mask was designed to filter air, yes, but psychologically, it signaled to the patient, you are already dead. I am a monster coming to collect you, but the real crime was the treatment. The standard protocol was bloodletting phlebotomy. Doctors believed the plague was in the blood, so they opened veins to drain it out. Energy-wise, this was catastrophic. Blood is the carrier of life force chi. When you drain the blood of a sick man, you are draining his battery right when he needs maximum voltage to fight the invader. You are lowering his vibration into the range of death. Bloodletting was not medicine, Elias. It was an unconscious ritual of sacrifice. It fed the feeders by accelerating the dying process. But there were rebels, the observer noted, zooming in on a figure moving through the plague-stricken streets of Aix-en-Provence. He wore no beak mask. He carried no leeches. This was Michel de Nostradamus, man you know as Nostradamus. History remembers him as a prophet of doom. But in his time, he was a healer of light. He achieved cure rates that were impossible by the standards of his day. Whole towns survived under his care. How? He did 3 things that defied the dogma, and all 3 were based on frequency elevation. A. The rose pill high vibration chemistry. Nostradamus created a rose pill made from rose hips, sawdust of cypress and iris, blended with rose juice. Modern science will tell you this worked because rose hips are packed with vitamin C, which boosts the immune system. This is true, but it is the minor truth. The major truth is vibrational physics. In the spectrum of biological substances, rose oil has the highest measured frequency of any essential oil, approximately 320 MHz. For comparison, a healthy human body vibrates at 62 to 68 MHz. A diseased body vibrates at 58 MHz. Death begins at 25 MHz. When Nostradamus gave his patients these pills, he was not just giving them a vitamin. He was dosing them with condensed high-frequency energy. He was introducing a 320 MHz signal into a body that was vibrating at the frequency of the plague. The rose frequency acted as a shockwave, forcing the body's energy field to rise above the range where the bacteria could function. he fought the Black Death with pink light. B. The elimination of the corpse, clearing the signal. Second, Xylos explained, Nostradamus insisted on removing the dead bodies immediately and burying them deep. The church often wanted to keep bodies for rites, or left them in the streets. Nostradamus understood that a rotting corpse is not just a biological hazard. It is an entropy generator. A pile of bodies broadcasts a powerful signal of defeat. It lowers the morale frequency of the entire neighborhood. By clearing the streets, he was clearing the visual and olfactory signal of death. He was sanitizing the collective consciousness of the town. C. Fresh air and water dilution of toxicity. Third, he ordered people to drink clean water and breathe fresh air. He unsealed the houses. He stopped the stagnation. Stagnation is the breeding ground of the plague. Flow is the nature of life. By restoring the flow of air and water, he restored the flow of Nostradamus was hated by his peers, Xylos revealed. They called him a heretic because he didn't bleed his patients. They hated him because his patients lived. He proved that you do not fight darkness by draining the light blood. You fight darkness by adding more light, rose, vitality. He showed that the true physician is not a mechanic who fixes a broken machine, but a gardener who raises the energy of the soil so the weeds cannot grow. But the alien paused. Nostradamus was an individual. Roch was an individual. To truly defeat a pandemic, you need more than a few heroes. You need a collective force. You need a human shield. And that brings us to the final, most powerful mechanism of survival, the caretakers. Saint Roch found immunity in the forest. Nostradamus engineered it in the lab. But there was a third group, Xylos projected, who found it in the very center of the fire. These were the caretakers. The anonymous monks, doctors, and sisters of the Hôtel in Paris and the hospices of Florence. They did not have rose pills. They did not have dogs. They walked into rooms thick with the smell of death. They washed the sores. They held the dying, and yet a statistically significant number of them did not get sick. Your historians call this divine protection or simply luck. We call it energetically invincible. The hologram displayed a human brain scan, but this one was different. It wasn't pulsing with the red of fear beta waves or the blue of calm alpha waves. It was glowing with a brilliant, high-frequency violet light. We monitored the biofields of these caretakers, the observer revealed. When a human being fully commits to the service of another, when they genuinely care more about the patient than their own survival, are fundamental. Shift occurs in the neurology. The ego, the self-processing unit located in the default mode network, goes offline. This is the part of the brain that usually screams, I am in danger. What about me? When the ego shuts down, the brain waves shift into gamma frequency, 40 Hz to 100 Hz. This is the state of peak flow. It is the frequency of high-level synthesis, universal love, and extreme focus. In this gamma state, the body's operating system changes. The stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, that suppress the immune system are flushed out. They are replaced by dopamine, endorphins, and oxytocin, a chemical cocktail that supercharges the white blood cells. Think of a radiator in a freezing room. Elias. Xylos used a simple analogy to explain the physics. As long as the radiator is generating intense heat and pushing it outward, the cold air cannot touch its surface. The pressure is going out, so nothing can come in. The flow is unidirectional. These caretakers were operating as human radiators. They were running so hot with the energy of purpose and compassion that they created a positive pressure field around their bodies. The bacteria Yersinia pestis, which vibrates at a low, sluggish frequency, literally could not penetrate this high-frequency shield. It was incinerated on contact with their aura. They didn't catch the plague because they didn't have space for it. Their minds were entirely occupied by the mission. There was no vacancy for fear. The hologram zoomed out to show the hospice as a whole. Instead of individual lights, Elias saw a web of light connecting the caretakers to each other and to the patients. This brings us to the final concept: true herd immunity. Your modern science defines herd immunity as a mathematical threshold of antibodies in a population. That is the gross physical layer. The real immunity is an energetic lattice. When a community stands together, when the nuns prayed together, when the doctors supported each other, they created a collective resonance. They formed a high-frequency zone, similar to a Faraday cage. Inside this zone, the vibration of the group was strong enough to repel the feeders. The parasitic entities thrive on isolation. They pick off the stragglers. They eat the lonely. But they cannot easily attack a cohesive group vibrating at the frequency of solidarity. The hospices that survived were the ones that maintained this spiritual cohesion. They proved that love is not soft. Love is a force field. Elias stepped back from the table. The map of Europe was no longer just a graveyard. It was a grid of light and dark. He saw the black holes of the cities where fear ruled, but he also saw the bright stars of the forests where the saints prayed, the pink glow of Nostradamus's clinics, and the violet webs of the hospices. The trap was isolation, Elias murmured, synthesizing the lesson, and the escape was always connection. Connection to nature, Roch. Connection to wisdom, Nostradamus. Connection to community, the caretakers. Precisely, Xylos said, his voice echoing with finality. The Black Death was a test of separation. Those who bought into the illusion of separation died. Those who bridged the gap lived. The bacteria was merely the physical auditor of the test. It checked your vibration and marked you. Pass or fail. But, Doctor, the alien's voice darkened, shifting the mood abruptly. The golden light of the hospice faded, replaced by the cold, blue glare of a digital screen. Your species has a short memory. The Black Death ended, yes. The population recovered, but the trap was not dismantled. It was just put in storage. And now, 600 years later, I see you dusting it off. Dr. Elias Thorne watched in horror as the holographic map of 1348 dissolved. The black ink that represented the bubonic plague didn't disappear. It simply changed shape. It morphed into the glowing red data streams of the modern world. It swirled around New York, London, Wuhan, Milan. Look at your world, Elias, Xylos commanded, his voice losing its detached observation tone and becoming sharp with warning. You sit in your climate-controlled rooms and pity the medieval peasant. You think you are safe because you have antibiotics, ventilators, and mRNA sequencing. You think the Black Death is ancient history. You are wrong. The dynamic is exactly the same. The Black Death was not a one-time biological accident. It is a recurring energetic pattern. It is a frequency trap that resets and activates whenever the collective vibration of a species drops below a critical threshold. And you, my friend, are currently walking through the same door. Let us analyze the first mistake, Xylos said, projecting two images side by side. On the left, The flagellants of 1348 men, in hoods whipping their own backs until the blood flowed, marching through the streets, screaming about the wrath of God, on the right. A 24-hour news channel in 2020, with a ticker tape at the bottom counting infections and deaths in real time, flashing red breaking news alerts every 5 minutes. Do you see the difference? Xylos asked. Because, energetically, there is none. The flagellants believed they were purging sin, but they were actually superspreaders of terror. Wherever they went, they lowered the vibration of the town. They brought the visible spectacle of pain. They collapsed a local morale. Your modern media is the digital flagellant. When the crisis hit, your information systems did not broadcast calm. They did not broadcast instructions for immune boosting or courage. Instead, they whipped your minds. They weaponized the amygdala. By broadcasting the death toll in real time, they kept the collective nervous system of humanity in a permanent state of fight or flight. They created a global nocebo field. We measured the cortisol levels of your planet, the observer revealed. They spiked higher than in 1348. Why? Because the medieval peasant only felt fear when the plague cart rolled past his window. You invited the plague cart into your pocket. You checked it before you got out of bed. You doom-scrolled at dinner. You ingested the vibration of helplessness continuously. This constant bath of stress hormones shut down your immune systems more effectively than any malnutrition ever could. You didn't need fleas to transmit the signal of death. You had fiber optics. And then the alien continued, tracing the lines of separation on the map. You repeated the mistake of isolation, but you twisted it. In Part D, we discussed the alchemical quarantine of Venice, 40 days of silence, 40 days of sea air. That was a reset. It worked because it disconnected the individual from the noise. In 2020, you implemented physical isolation but allowed digital infection. You locked people in small boxes, apartments. Cut them off from nature, the St. Roch cure. Cut them off from community, the caretaker cure. And then plugged them into the panic machine, the internet. This was the worst of both worlds, Xylos said, shaking his head. You created a pressure cooker of anxiety. Without the grounding presence of other humans, the mind turned inward and began to eat itself. Depression skyrocketed. Suicide skyrocketed. These were the secondary plagues caused by the frequency trap. But the deepest wound, Xylos noted, was how you treated each other. You began to practice spiritual distancing. You started viewing your neighbor not as a human being, but as a vector. You looked at a cough with suspicion, not compassion. You stepped away from people on the sidewalk, not out of respect, but out of fear. You denied the dying the touch of comfort. We saw elderly people dying alone behind glass walls, surrounded by machines but starved of love. You denied them the St. Roch connection. You protected their biology but shattered their souls. In doing so, you fragmented the collective aura. You broke the energetic lattice that protects a species. You became billions of lonely islands, vibrating in terror, waiting for a savior to inject you with safety. You forgot that safety comes from the strength of the tribe, not the sterility of the bubble. The hologram shifted to show a modern hospitaler, marvel of technology, gleaming with chrome and plastic. This is the paradox of your age, Elias, the observer said. You have mastered the hardware. You have ventilators that breathe for you. You have antibiotics that kill bacteria. You have vaccines that teach cells. But you have completely forgotten the software. You treat the human body like a car. If a part breaks, you try to fix the part, but you ignore the driver. You ignore the consciousness that is driving the vehicle. You have lost the wisdom of the alchemist. You do not know how to transmute fear into faith. You do not know how to use the mind to fortify the body. You are terrified of death, so you are willing to sacrifice living just to avoid dying. The Black Death killed 200 million people because they lacked physical hygiene. Your modern plagues are killing your spirit because you lack mental hygiene. You wash your hands for 20 seconds, but you do not wash your minds of the terror you consume for 20 hours a day. Finally, Xylos said, his voice dropping to a whisper, we must speak of the entities. In 1348, the feeders, the parasitic entities, hovered over the cities like dark clouds, drinking the energy of grief. Today, they have updated their methods. They have mechanized the harvest. What do you think the algorithm is, Doctor? Social media algorithms are designed to maximize engagement, and the emotion that generates the most engagement is outrage and fear. The algorithm promotes conflict. It promotes bad news. It promotes division. The algorithm is the automated mouth of the feeder. Every time you get angry at a stranger online, you generate loosh. Every time you share a terrifying headline, you generate loosh. You have built a global machine that farms human energy and feeds it to the frequency trap. The Black Death of the 14th century was a harvest of biological life. The Black Death of the 21st century is a harvest of attention and consciousness. The frequency trap is active, Dr. Xylos warned, his violet eyes glowing with intensity. The feeders are feasting on your anxiety right now. The trap has been dusted off, updated, and redeployed. And unless you change the signal, unless you learn the lesson of Saint Roch, of Nostradamus, of the caretakers, the history books of the future will not record your triumph over the virus. They will record your surrender to the fear. The question is not, when will the next pandemic come? The question is, will you be vibrating at a frequency that can survive it? The transmission from Xylos ended. The obsidian disc on Dr. Elias Thorne's desk pulsed once, a final heartbeat of violet light, and then went dark. The room was silent, but it wasn't the empty silence of the plague. It was the pregnant silence of a womb. Elias walked to the window of the archive tower. He looked out at the water. He understood now. The history of the world wasn't a straight line of progress. It was a spiral. We passed the same points again and again, each time at a higher or lower frequency, depending on our choices. We are not victims of history. We are the DJs of reality. The lesson of 1348 is burned into the bones of this planet. The lesson of 2020 is fresh in our minds. We have seen what happens when humanity chooses fear. We have seen the frequency trap in action. It starts with a threat. It is amplified by the storytellers, priests, then media, now. It isolates us. It makes us hate our neighbors. And finally, it collapses our internal shields, inviting the very destruction we tried to run from. But Xylos left us with a secret key. A back door out of the matrix. The trap requires your consent. It cannot harvest your energy if you do not offer it. It cannot lower your frequency if you are busy raising it. The Black Death ended not because the bacteria got tired. It ended because the vibration of humanity shifted. The horror exhausted itself, and out of the ashes, people chose life again. They chose art. They chose discovery. They chose the Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance, the explosion of beauty. Science and human potential did not happen despite the plague. It happened because of it. The darkness was so deep that it forced the light to evolve. We are at that tipping point again. The old world is dying. The systems of control are tightening because they are terrified of losing their grip. The fear is rising. But the Renaissance is waiting. The question is, which timeline will you inhabit? If you have watched this far, you are not a passive observer. You are a member of the resistance. But we do not fight with guns or protests. We fight with frequency. Here is your spiritual survival protocol. This is how you build an immune system that no virus, and no algorithm can penetrate. Step 1. The mental quarantine starved the feeder, just as the Venetians stopped the ships. You must stop the data. I challenge you to a 7-day detox. Turn off the news. Mute the notifications. Unfollow the accounts that make you angry or afraid. Starve the feeders. If you do not feed the fear, it must leave your field. Reclaim your attention. Your attention is the most valuable currency in the universe. Do not spend it on things that poison you. Step 2. The saint. Roch connection grounding. You cannot heal if you are disconnected. Find your dog. Find the source of unconditional love in your life. It might be a pet. It might be a forest. It might be the sun on your face. Spend 20 minutes a day in direct contact with a biological life form that has no ego. Let their simple, steady vibration tune your chaotic heart. Let nature remind you that life wants you to live. Step 3. The caretaker state purpose. Fear asks, what will happen to me? Power asks, how can I help you? When you feel anxiety rising, do not shrink. Expand. Find someone to help. Cook a meal for a neighbor. Call a friend. Create something beautiful. Move into the gamma state of service. Be the radiator. When you are the source of heat, the cold cannot touch you. We are done being victims. We are done being vectors of disease. We are vessels of light. The alien Xylos called us cattle. He was wrong. We acted like cattle because we forgot we were lions. But the sleep is over. You have a pharmacy inside your chest. Your heart generates an electromagnetic field 5,000 times stronger than your brain. When that field is coherent, when it beats with gratitude and courage, it creates a literal shield that burns up low-frequency pathogens. Science is just starting to catch up to what the mystics always knew. Love is the ultimate antivirus. The next time the world tells you to be afraid. The next time the ticker tape counts the dead. The next time they try to lock you in the frequency trap, ... Remember 1348. Remember the trap. And then, defy it. Smile, breathe, love. You are the immune system of the planet. And the planet is ready to heal. If you are ready to exit the fear matrix, if you are ready to be part of the new Renaissance, ... then make your mark. Go to the comments below. Do not just type words. Type a spell. Type a command to your own DNA. Write, I am the frequency of life. Let the algorithm see it. Let the feeders see it and tremble. Let the universe know that you are online. I am the narrator. The history class is over. The future is yours too, right?